I'm a police officer in South Jersey. I've been doing this since I was 23. For the most part, it's not as exciting as it's cracked up to be. Not a whole lot happens in my county. Usually the worst calls are disturbance calls or an occasional shoplifting, with something a little more serious sprinkled in there once in a blue moon. I've done just about every possible shift there is. I did my time on the night shift, and there were definitely some weirder calls during the night shift than the day shift. But this one time I was working the night shift, I didn't get any calls. I was just cruising on a quiet road with no streetlights and woods on both sides. I saw the reflection of taillights suddenly approaching on the right-hand side of the road on the grass. As I got closer, I saw that the driver's side door was open. I started to veer onto the grass as I slowed down, fully planning on getting out to see if the driver needed assistance. I saw someone step out of the car, stand by the door for a second, then started to run into the woods. I radioed the codes for a suspicious person or vehicle, then got out of the car with my flashlight on and my hand on my holster just in case. In this situation, I had to expect the worst. I got to the front door of the car and looked inside, half expecting to see someone else sitting there, but the car seemed empty. There was a seriously foul odor emanating from inside the car though. It smelled like a rotting animal. I called out to the woods asking if anybody's there and needs assistance, and I stepped to the tree line waving the flashlight around. I went back to the car to take a closer look inside the passenger side. There were multiple bloodied tissues and paper towels on the floor on the passenger side as well as the rear seats. They were soaked in blood. The entire papers were dark red. At some point while looking inside the car, I heard footsteps inside the woods. I spun around with my flashlight and yelled, "Come out of the woods." I didn't see anyone. Someone was hiding in there, and that was confirmed when I heard a deep voice somewhere beyond the trees and shrubs. I had no idea what the voice said. I responded saying, "Show yourself, are you hurt?" I prepared to unholster my gun as I walked a little closer. I repeated myself, asking, "Are you hurt?" No response. The voice I heard before didn't sound like a person in pain bleeding out. Additionally, why would they run into the woods upon seeing a police car? Something was way off. I went back to the car and requested assistance. I noticed as I investigated the car further that it had no plates, and when I went back inside of the rear, I found something that made me almost puke from shock. There was something heavy wrapped in bloodied paper towel. I unwrapped it with my gloves on to find a severed hand, and it took me a hot second to realize what it was, because it was completely dark red soaked in blood. Now the situation went from a 5 to a 10. I radioed that there was a possible murder and needed backup. I now put my cruiser's lights on to help other officers more easily identify my location. When backup arrived, we did a thorough search of the woods, looking for possible blood trails. Nothing though. There were not even any blood trails leading from the car, which meant that the hand and blood on the tissues I found may not have been from the person who I saw run into the woods. Eventually the K9 unit had to come and search for the person. Hours upon hours went into this search, well past dawn, turning up nothing. The vehicle was taken into custody. It had been reported stolen by a resident of a nearby town, who said he had no idea who could have stolen his car. Fingerprints had been collected from the steering wheel, and DNA testing had been done on the hand. There was not a single match to anybody in the database. To this day, there was never any progress in finding out who the driver of that car was, and whose severed hand that was. My partner and I are assigned to a unit in the sheriff's department that handles tethers, or ankle monitors. One night while looking for someone that absconded the program, we followed her last known location to a somewhat shady area of our county. Not many stops are routine, but this one was unsettling from the beginning. My partner walked to the front door as I held the side of the house, keeping my focus on him and the side of the house. After knocking on the door, we could hear movement from inside. As the door opened, a middle-aged woman slowly peered out of the door and looked directly at me. There was no way she knew where I was standing. I was not in view of any window at the front or side of the house. What was strange was that most people would answer the person at the front door, not look at the side of the house first. After a moment, she let us in after we asked if she knew who Camille was, who we were searching for. She mumbled something to the effect that she was there. Things went from 0 to 100 immediately, as she dropped to her hands and knees and started scooting on the floor, yelling for Camille. This lady had some obvious mental issues, and we figured this Camille was a caretaker of some kind. We both knew the situation was off, but started searching the house. The entire time this woman was yelling for Camille, never once getting back to her feet, just kind of following us on the ground. The time must have been around 8 p.m. and it was dark outside. The inside of the home had one light on. There were no TVs or any electronics of any kind. The house had a strange feeling to it. The layout of this older style home had about 4 bedrooms and 2 floors. Every time I left a room, I swear I was in a part of the house I had not just been in. I would enter a hallway and seemingly be in another part of the house, like I entered a dimensional gap or something. The woman would sometimes be right behind me without making a sound. I was starting to question how all this was possible. At one point, we both entered the upstairs, which looked to be a regular upstairs with bedrooms, or maybe a bathroom at the top of the stairs. As we tried to open the door, initially it would not budge. It appeared that it had been sealed somehow, like it had been painted over, and paint had dried in the seams of the door. After putting in a little extra effort, the door opened, revealing an attic, not bedrooms. If you remember Paranormal Activity, when the guy finds a picture of his wife and child in the insulation, that's what it looked like. There was nothing but storage space, insulation, and an older style light bulb with a string hanging from it. The lady was just sitting at the bottom of the stairs watching us, occasionally yelling for Camille. After what seemed like an hour of searching this house over and over again, going into rooms I swear I had just left, we called it and cleared the property. As we drove off, the woman was now standing right in front of the door, staring at us as we left. According to when we called dispatch and when we cleared, we were only there for 20 minutes. It felt like we were there for well over an hour or 2. I don't know what was more unsettling, the fact that it was late at night, the lady yelling Camille's name and scooting on her hands and knees, or quietly showing up behind me when I had not heard her move, or the fact that she was standing at the door just staring at us as we left. We have not returned to that house. My family and I live throughout the middle of Georgia. Not many stories come out of this area, and this one I'm about to share makes us glad of that fact. My cousin, who I'll call Bob, has been a police officer for 5 years. He went into the force bright-eyed and optimistic, I guess like so many do. It sounds corny, but he genuinely wanted to make a difference and help improve the lives of the people in his community. One day, they got an alert from a house somewhere between Macon and Roberta. To hear Bob tell it, it was a place that people had thought was abandoned for years. Gives you an idea of the state the house was in. Anyway, when they arrived, an older gentleman was sitting on the steps outside the front door with his hand in his pockets. Bob and the other officer approached him and were alarmed to see that the man was crying. Well, not crying really, but sobbing. He was also muttering something to himself about how awful it is. They tried to question the man, but the guy was completely incoherent. It didn't take but a couple of seconds to figure out that the poor guy was traumatized. As his partner called for another car, Bob drew his gun and decided to enter the house. The smell inside the house was overpoweringly rancid. He told me that the kitchen and living room were a total wreck. It was clear the owners of the house were hoarders. Pots and pans stacked damn near to the ceiling, spoiled food all over the table, takeout containers scattered all over the floor. Disgusting. As procedure dictates, Bob called out to see if anyone would answer. Silence. He told me that even with all his training and experience over those past 5 years, his heart rate was already building fast. Gun at the ready, he checked out the living room and saw nobody was there either. He made his way down the hall where the smell was getting much worse. Just as it all became too much, he covered his mouth and nose and opened the door to what he suspected was the bedroom. In the bed were 2 corpses, gray-skinned and covered with flies. Despite his churning stomach, Bob decided to go in for a closer look, a decision he said he's regretted since. One of the corpses was male, the other female. The skin on their faces was already starting to fall off, and the flies were flying in and out of their mouths. Some were landing and sitting on their eyeballs. As Bob inspected the female's corpse, he was horrified to find that she was holding an even smaller dead body, an infant. Wasn't until a large cockroach crawled out of the dead infant's mouth that Bob ran outside the house, doubled over, and threw up his lunch all over the steps the man had been sitting on. When the other cars finally arrived, they were able to do a more thorough inspection. The older man that Bob and his partner had met when they first arrived was a former co-worker and friend of the dead man. They'd worked together at a peach packing company. The man hadn't showed up for over a week, and he'd gone to their house to see if he was okay. The poor man had been the first to see that horrible sight in the bedroom. The story that they put together was that the wife and husband had at some point become addicted to opioids. After some kind of operation a year or so before, they had started abusing painkillers together, and the addiction grew and grew until they started shooting up and snorting heroin. Their daughter, who wasn't more than a couple years old, had died of neglect. When the husband and wife discovered their baby's corpse, they finally broke completely and decided to end themselves. The coroner found enough heroin in both their bodies to kill them twice over. Bob's still on the force, but he started drinking a little too much after that. He's been going to therapy and he's since managed to get his drinking under control. But almost every time we talk, he says that he still has nightmares about that poor child's corpse. And in his nightmares, the baby's still crying. I once responded to a call of a possible breaking and entering. A young woman living alone called in fear, saying that she came home to find a broken window downstairs, but nothing seemed to be stolen and she couldn't find anyone inside. But then when she went upstairs to bed, she thought she could hear footsteps moving around downstairs. Her call disconnected shortly after she said that, and the woman wouldn't pick up to any of the attempted callbacks. I took the call and arrived to the little house. I went to knock on the front door, and after a minute, I gave it another set of knocks and pressed the doorbell. After another minute, I tried one more time, this time banging really loudly and ringing the bell again. When there was no answer this time, I decided to inspect the house. I walked around the house, and I found the busted window. It was a window big enough to crawl through with ease. I stuck my head into the dark house and yelled, "It's the police." It was silent. I radioed to dispatch that the house seemed silent. More officers were en route, but I didn't feel right waiting around in case there was someone truly in danger in the house. I radioed that I'm going into the house through the window, and then I climbed through it. I stepped over the shattered glass into the kitchen. I drew my gun and started walking through the kitchen, hearing the glass crunching below my boots. I shouted into the house to make my presence as a police officer known to anyone who was inside. I didn't hear any footsteps, so I went upstairs, as the woman on the phone told dispatch that she heard footsteps downstairs, so that would mean her bedroom was upstairs. I wasn't trying to be too quiet as I went up the stairs, but I also wasn't stomping around. I didn't know what to expect, if someone with a weapon was in the house or if the woman was just alone in bed. I said, "Ma'am, it's a police officer. Are you here?" And I heard back a soft female voice from upstairs saying yes. I followed the voice to one of the bedrooms, where I saw a woman sitting up in her bed under the covers. She looked at me, and I asked if she was okay. She said she was fine. I noticed a slight tremble in her voice. I kept the lights to the bedroom off as I looked at her. There was enough natural moonlight in the room that I could examine her facial expression. She looked distressed. I told her I was responding to her phone call, and then I asked her why she hung up and didn't pick up the callbacks. She stuttered and said no one is here. I caught on to what was going on. I looked at the closet and made a slight head nod to her. She very slightly shook her head no. I looked down under the bed and pointed, and she shook her head yes. The weight of the pressure of what to do next was 1,000 pounds. The best idea I came up with on the spot was telling her, "All right, ma'am, I just need you to sign this report form stating that I was here and there was nothing unusual." She said okay and got up from the bed and came over to me. And when she was close enough, I pushed her out of the room and then drew my gun and yelled, "Come out from under the bed." I was still shocked when I saw a dark figure actually slowly coming out from under the bed. I said, "Hands first and drop any weapons." I heard the clank of something drop to the floor, which turned out to be a gun. A middle-aged man in all black clothes stepped out from under the bed with his hands up. I made the arrest on the spot and brought him outside, right around the time the other officers were arriving. The woman had hung up the phone on the police when she thought the footsteps were upstairs, and she didn't want the intruder to hear the audio from the phone call. This was also why she didn't pick up the phone. because by this point the intruder entered the room and had her at gunpoint. And since the police were already coming, for whatever reason, instead of fleeing the scene, the intruder threatened to shoot the woman if she made a sound when the police came. After I had rung the bell, he hid under the bed and told her to pretend he wasn't there. I'm glad I was able to catch on to the situation. It could have gone a number of ways if I hadn't. Years ago, I did the night shift at a gas station because I was strapped for cash and needed a second job. I worked the night shift there for a few months. It was around my second or third month that this guy started regularly coming in really late at night, always around 2 a.m. He was about 6 feet tall. He had long, stringy hair. He'd always come in, buy a tall boy, and leave. But after a while, he one night asked me my name. I told him my name, and he just kept saying, "Rob, I like that," as he'd laugh to himself. He cracked open the tall boy he just bought and walked out of the store talking to himself. He was clearly hammered. This was the night I was curious to see if he had been drinking and driving every single time that he'd come to the store. I watched as he left, and he walked out of sight off the gas station property. That would make sense. He never once bought gas anytime he came in. He'd always just buy alcohol. I'd seen him just about every night after that for a while. He'd come in, some nights noticeably drunker than others. And sometimes he'd just lean on one of the shelves for a while and not say anything. He'd always greet me with a "Hey Rob" anytime he'd come in. One night he was just leaning on a shelf drinking the tall boy he just bought and not saying anything, just staring at a wall. I asked him for his name finally. He looked at me, took about 5 seconds, and said, "Bob." Now, I always felt like Bob is a go-to fake name when you're lying about your name. I wondered if the first thing that came to mind for him was Bob because it rhymes with my name. But I went with it. I said, "So Bob, where do you work?" He laughed so loud it actually startled me. He said he doesn't work. He said the government completely fucked him out of his job. I got the vibe he was wasted again. He looked at me with an angry-looking face, but interestingly said, "I like you, Rob. You seem like you know what you're doing." I didn't know what that meant, but he walked out of the store right after that. I didn't see him again for a while. I'd say over a week passed, which for a regular like him was a while. Bob always gave me this off, mildly creepy vibe. I figured he was usually drunk, but something was obviously wrong in his personal life. Well, one very stormy night, with less customers than usual, likely because of the storm, I heard the ding of the front door as someone entered, and I swear before looking I imagined it to be Bob. When I looked, I was shocked to see it was actually him. But it was a much scarier version of Bob. He was completely soaked. He wasn't wearing a rain jacket or using an umbrella. He was just in a dark shirt and jeans. His long hair was drenched, and he was just standing by the door, looking straight ahead at the wall. He looked like he was angry, and yet his mind was elsewhere, like his thoughts were running. The way he was standing there blankly, staring at nothing, completely soaked, it was freaking me out. I said, "Bob, are you okay?" He didn't turn his head or move. He stood still and said, "I did something really bad." I asked, "What did you do?" He then looked at me, said, "I need somewhere to hide," then walked past me at the register towards the little restroom hallway. He disappeared behind the wall, and I heard one of the doors open and close. I was genuinely getting uncomfortable with Bob now. I didn't enjoy his presence whenever he was in the store, and tonight something was extra off about him. He seemed like a zombie, and that "I did something really bad" comment was incredibly creepy. Some time passed, and Bob never came out from the bathroom. I assumed he was wasted again, probably passed out or puking. Either way, I didn't want to intervene. And then, the next thing I remember, the lights to the place cut out, and the store was completely dark. I was standing in a pitch-dark gas station during a major storm with an unhinged drunk man. I used the flashlight from behind the counter to make my way towards the back of the store by the inventory storage and the panel board. The door to the back was in the same little hallway as the restrooms. As I walked by the 2 restroom doors, both of them were ajar, and Bob wasn't in either of them. I went through the door to the back. I was planning on going straight to the panel board, but I stopped when I heard a slight dripping in the room somewhere, and the squeaking of wet shoes. My heart sank into my stomach. I said Bob in a very weak and scared voice. I heard squeaks right to my left. When I pointed my flashlight in that corner, there was Bob, with his eyes open wide, and he lunged at me and started screaming, "I'm gonna fucking kill you." I pushed him off of me as he was clawing at my back. I ran back through the door to the front of the store. He didn't follow me. I grabbed my rain jacket and ran straight to my car. I sat in my car as I dialed 911 and spoke to an operator. I stayed on the line with her, and it didn't take long for a couple police officers to arrive and go inside with me. Bob was still hiding in the back room, huddled in a corner, apparently like some rabid creature. His pupils were huge. I only noticed it then. He was on something. They took him to the station after I told them that he lunged at me, threatened to kill me. It stated that he did something really bad earlier. I found out over a month later that this Bob guy's real name was Martin. He had brutally beaten his ex-wife to death. It might have happened on that same night that he came into the gas station. Long story short, I never wanted to work another night shift at any job ever again after this night.
I've done
a lot of night driving in my life. Not for work or anything. My old friend group and I would always just stay out till crazy hours when we were in our late teens and early 20s. I guess you could say we were the losers. We thought staying out till 5 a.m. every weekend, hanging at parks or in parking lots was cool. Looking back, it was a stupid waste of time. But basically for that reason, I've done my fair share of driving at off hours in the night. And usually that's when the drunkos and crazy people are on the roads. It was a weekend night. It had to be approaching 4 in the morning. I wanted to go home. I drove one of my friends home from the park we were hanging out at. But before driving myself home, I had to stop for gas. I used to like getting gas at night because there would be no other cars in the way. I pulled into one of my usual gas stations not far from my parents' house. As I was walking to the building to pay, there was a short guy wearing a hood walking past me. He stopped in his tracks and stared me down as I walked past. I said, "What?" as I kept walking. He said nothing, so I kept walking. Typical crackhead. I went inside the building to pay the attendant for my gas. I also bought a lottery ticket while I was there. I came back outside and started to fill up. I looked around, and as expected, it was a ghost town at this hour. Once done, I got back in the car and started driving home. Halfway home, I heard something behind me, in the car. I looked in the rearview mirror, and there was someone in the rear seat looking back at me. I let out a scream so loud I probably almost collapsed my lungs. I slammed on the brakes and screamed, "Get out!" It was the dude from the gas station. I opened my doors and started screaming help, knowing at least a couple people would come out from their houses. Sure enough, a couple houses' porch lights turned on, and I saw some doors opening. The guy got out of my car and said, "I could have slit your throat." As some people came out of their houses, he started to run away down the street. I didn't chase after him. A couple people came over to me and asked if I was all right, and I told them how a stranger was in my back seat. By now, the guy was out of sight. I wasn't about to start driving round after a crackhead. I thanked the people who came out and continued my drive home, making sure I didn't see him anywhere the rest of the drive. That was the scariest experience of my life. This event happened in the mid-60s in the Atlanta area. At that time, I was about 8 or 9 years old. My father taught school in a suburb of Atlanta that was some distance from where our home was located. I went to the same school where he taught, so I rode with him every day. However, we had to get up very early each morning and head out before the sun was up. We always stopped several mornings each week to top off on gas at a small, independent station. We were often the first car there shortly after the station opened. In those days, everything was full service. There was a booth with an attendant who would come out and fill your tank, wash your windows, etc. He would always be carrying a wad of bills in his pocket and a device on his belt from which he counted out coins. Behind the pumps were tiny bathrooms. I would often use the bathroom on mornings that we stopped there, as it was a fairly long drive. One morning, we again arrived before dawn to find the station completely deserted. It was totally quiet other than the traffic sounds going by. There was no sign of an attendant, either in the booth or anywhere else around the station. My father blew the car horn once, then again a few more times, but there was no response. We discussed what might be the problem. My father first suggested that perhaps the attendant might be in the bathroom, but when he still did not appear, my father said that maybe the attendant had experienced car trouble and had not been able to make it to work on time. We continued to wait for several minutes. No other cars pulled in. I told my father I needed to use the bathroom and put my hand on the car door handle to get out, but he told me that we could not wait any longer and I could use the bathroom at the next station we came to. So we left, still wondering what happened. A day or two later, my father was reading the local newspaper when I heard a loud exclamation from him. He excitedly told my mother and I about a small article which stated that the body of a gas station attendant had been discovered with multiple stabs stuffed into the men's bathroom of the station. It was the station we always went to. The article said the motive appeared to be robbery, as all cash and coins were missing. Early in the morning, the total amount of money was probably not a lot. The article gave no hint as to what amount was taken, but either way, that didn't stop the killer. I've often wondered how I would have been affected at that young age if I had insisted on going to the bathroom at that station and had opened the door to discover the body of the murdered attendant. We never went to that gas station again. This took place when I was 25. I was driving from North to South Texas. Due to my work schedule, I could only do this late at night. I was on Route 281 for much of the drive, and at these late hours, it was an easy, straight drive. I just had to keep myself awake. I was already kind of shot from work, and then getting on the road right after it was brutal. I had to keep making stops for coffee at random gas stations just to keep myself going. I think it was my third time starting to feel a little sleepy, and on top of that, I needed to fill up my tank as well. I pulled into the first gas station I could find on the desolate side roads. I can't remember what kind of gas station it was, maybe a Sunoco or Shell. There was one other car in the parking lot. I parked next to one of the pumps and went inside. There were two people in the shop, the cashier, and then I noticed another guy pacing down the aisles. I went to the coffee maker and poured myself a cup. The guy who was pacing around came up to me and said, "Careful, it's hot," and then he laughed. It was a piss-poor, creepy, unnecessary attempt at starting a conversation that I didn't bite at. I was not in the mood. I didn't reply, and I took the coffee to the cashier where I paid for it as well as for the gas. The guy came up behind me while I was paying and said, "I really like that top." I said thank you just loud enough for him to hear. He followed it up with, "Where are you heading off to so late at night?" I was so annoyed by this point, I firmly asked him to leave me alone. The cashier was some 40-something-year-old Hispanic man. I wasn't sure how much English he understood or if he was even reading the situation that was happening in front of him, but he was also a smaller, shorter man, and it was doubtful he was going to step in at all. The man behind me said calm down after I asked him to leave me alone, and left the shop without saying another word and went to my car. I heard the door open again a few seconds after I left the shop. I was next to my car now, preparing to fill up the tank. As gas started pumping into my car, I heard his footsteps on the concrete over on the other side of the pumps. Then they stopped. When the footsteps stopped, I glanced over, and I noticed him, creepily standing on the other side of the pump I was using. He was quite literally just standing there watching me. He wasn't filling up gas, there wasn't even a car there. I started considering grabbing my pepper spray from my center console. The guy said, "Are you alone?" When he asked that, the gravity of the situation escalated greatly. I replied, "No, my boyfriend is in the car." I opened the door and quickly grabbed the pepper spray from the center console. I grabbed it and held it at my side, pretending to still be focused on pumping the gas. The man was inching his way around the gas pump, like he was coming around to my side. He said, "I don't see anyone in the car." I pulled out the pepper spray and aimed it up at the man, and he laughed and backed away. He said he was just trying to make conversation. He was walking backwards with his focus locked onto me still. I was just about done pumping gas. Then I felt and heard a clank. The gas stopped pumping. My tank was full. I had like $6 worth of change. I had to go back inside to get it. The man was in between the shop and I. I had to make a choice. I made the decision to get my change. I had my arm up in the air still, pointing the pepper spray can at him. He continued to back away, chuckling. When it was safe, I turned my back to him and entered the shop and asked the cashier for change. I told the cashier that that man was making me really uncomfortable, but it seemed like he didn't really understand what I was saying. Once I got my change, I looked out the glass door into the parking lot before leaving. I didn't see that man out there. I was scared to go out there. Like, what if he were hiding somewhere? I stepped outside in front of the shop. I didn't leave that little sidewalk. I just stayed there, looking around. That man was gone out of sight, which meant he was absolutely hiding. Eventually, a pickup truck pulled into the parking lot and pulled next to one of the pumps. A large man with a beard stepped out, and I went over to him asking him for help. I asked him to check if there was a man hiding behind my car. He was confused, but he did it for me. He got to the other side of my car, and he yelled, "What are you doing?" And there went that creepy man, hurrying away from behind my car. He started to run away into the darkness surrounding the gas station. I thanked that man so much that he said in his thick southern accent to be careful out there. I left that parking lot in a hurry, and I continued the rest of my drive. That creepy man was 100% waiting to pounce as soon as I unlocked my car doors. And that's really disturbing to me.